back in session. Please be seated.
Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Ablow.
Good afternoon.
How are you today, sir?
I am well, thank you.
Dr. Ablow, just generally, I know in direct examination you talked about a lot of hospitalizations, a lot of medical a lot of medications, and a lot of different diagnoses, and I think you were referring to the DSM-5.
Correct.
And you had been referring to a hospitalizations and psychiatric treatment chart, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree with me, just generally, sir, that a large concentration of these psychiatric hospitalizations occurred between 1999 and 2002?
A large concentration of them, yes.
Yes. Okay. And that would have put him, Mr. Alemany, for those years, approximately age 14, 15 to 17, 18 before he finally aged out of the DYS system?
Yes.
And would you agree with me, Dr. Ablow, that with respect to some of the hospitalizations you testified to from 1999 to 2002, that he wound up in some of those facilities that you talked about being transferred from a DYS facility?
Yes.
You'd acknowledge that. And you've been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
And you're familiar that if there's a referral from a DYS facility, that the patient, in this case, Mr. Alemany, he would have to go to a hospital for an evaluation first, and then from there be referred to a psychiatric facility such as Bournewood or Westwood or one of the other facilities that you testified to. You see that in the records, didn't you?
Yes. Generally, there's an emergency room involved in the transfer.
Right.
Sometimes it can be direct.
Right.
Direct.
For lack of a better term, sometimes there's a pit stop, correct?
Sure.
Sure. And you were thorough, you were careful in your review of the many hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of mental health records that you reviewed at Mr. Denner's request.
It's about 5,000 pages, so I was as careful as I could possibly be.
Absolutely. So, acknowledging that window, and I'll ask you some more questions about that window from 1999 to 2002, those did overlap with DYS custody, correct?
Correct.
Now, from 2004 to 2010, Dr. Ablow, did you have the opportunity to review medical records from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center?
Yes.
And would you agree with me that, at least with respect to those records that you reviewed, that those were more for medical treatment, not necessarily for mental health treatment? You'd agree with me on that?
Correct.
Okay. And most recently, you had the opportunity to review records from the Bridgewater State Hospital that would have gone from one date approximately, there was one stay July 25th to August 14th of 2013, and the admission continued from August 15th, 2013 to August 5th of 2014. You had the opportunity to review those records, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In between 2002 and 2013, did you have any psychiatric records at your disposal for your review that you based your opinion on today, in between 2002 and 2013?
We have the records from the various penal institutions where Mr. Alemany was treated, so yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I forgot about those. You were aware in that time frame from 2002 to 2013 that he was incarcerated on a number of occasions?
Many different occasions, yes.
And you reviewed records from the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department relative to that time frame?
I did.
Were they predominantly the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department records?
Probably.
Okay. Is there a record that you saw that I'm not aware of?
Well, I wouldn't know that.
Okay, I'll ask the next question. And you concede that he was in and out of custody, as you testified, from 2002 to 2012, correct?
Right, exactly right.
Okay. I want to ask you a couple of questions. You used a phrase in your direct examination with Mr. Denner. You talked about a genetic disorder. The genetic disorder, are you talking about the mother's schizophrenia? And what's her name?
His mother is named, I'll tell you now.
Well, you met with her, didn't you? Did you speak with her?
I spoke with her, Estrella.
Okay. You didn't review any medical records for his mother, for Edwin Alemany's mother?
I did not.
Correct. And this genetic disorder, describe what you testified to on direct regarding her schizophrenia affected Edwin Alemany.
Well, we can't know every way in which it did, but when I refer to the genetic predisposition, there's a generally accepted notion in psychiatry that families can be more predisposed, some families than others, to these major mental illnesses. And so when we evaluate someone, part of the evaluation is always a family history. And we're not just seeking traumatic events from someone's past or good events. We're also asking, were there other members of the family that suffered with one or another condition? Because it can help you understand, well, this could be happening in the next generation.
And most, if not all, of the records you reviewed were the 5,000 or so, approximately 5,000 pages of mental health records and case-related materials that you referenced on direct examination, correct?
Well, did you say most of the psychiatric records or most of the records? There were a lot of records, as you know, that are grand jury minutes and...
I'm asking you that. The approximately 5,000 pages of mental health records and the case-related materials are the universe of documents that you reviewed for this case?
Yes, sir.
And part of that process, as you described, was interviewing Mr. Alemany on 2 different dates in 2015, was it?
Correct.
Well, actually, one late December 2014,
Correct.
and the other March of 2015.
Correct.
Total of 4 hours?
4.5 hours, yes.
And you had, as you described, I'll ask you some more questions about this later, but you had contact with the family as well?
Correct.
You had the opportunity to review records from the Arbor Hospital, sir?
I did.
Okay. And I want to show you this entry and ask you if you remember seeing this. First of all, I'll ask you if you recognize the cover sheet.
I do. That's the Arbor Hospital letterhead.
You recognize the records?
I do.
Okay. And this entry right here in the comments section where it says, met with mom and sister today who deny any significant family history. Did you read that?
Yes.
And as far as that goes, how do you square that with your testimony today that she had a history of schizophrenia? When did that surface?
It surfaced in my discussions with her and in my discussions with Mr. Alemany and in my discussions with her son, Mr. Alemany's brother.
Which son? She has 3, doesn't she?
Yes, this was, in fact, with her son, Joseph.
Or Jose?
Jose.
You never independently reviewed any mental health records or any type of medical records dealing with Edwin Alemany's mother, correct?
Not medical records, no.
Okay. The various diagnoses you gave and opinions you cited relative to Edwin Alemany, you cited the DSM-5, correct?
Correct.
Who puts out that particular publication?
The American Psychiatric Association.
And I heard you talk to or give an answer on direct regarding your professional affiliations. There is a national organization, the American Psychiatric Association.
Correct.
And do you have a professional affiliation with that organization?
I have written books for the organization, but I am not a member, which I think is where you're going. I'm not a member of the American Psychiatric Association.
You're not a member today?
Correct.
You were a member before?
I was.
Okay. And when most recently were you a member of the American Psychiatric Association?
Probably 3 years ago.
Did you resign?
I did.
And why did you resign?
I resigned partly because I felt that the Psychiatric Association wasn't giving enough voice to support for psychotherapy as a healing art, partly because I felt that they were deferring too much to insurance companies in creating documents like this, like the DSM-5, and partly because I didn't think that they were fully invested in and grappling with the many important issues involved in one issue, which is transgender disorders.
Let me ask you this. Mr. Denner asked you some questions about your practice. 30% of your practice is devoted to forensic psychiatry. That 30% is broken down into 50% criminal, 50% civil. Is that correct?
Correct.
70% of your practice treating people, but you also have some other endeavors that you loosely refer to as writing books and some media endeavors.
Correct.
Relative to the answer that you just gave, the last part of your answer about resigning from the APA, did that have anything to do with you commenting in a public forum on the media regarding transgender issues?
Well, as I indicated, I felt that the association did not have a comprehensive view of that topic, but I wasn't, if you're saying, was I asked to resign or did they take exception to my comments, they didn't.
And in relation to the comments that were made, when did you resign?
Well, I don't think there was a clear connection at all between the comments I made, so you're saying in relation to the comments I made, but in time, which may be your question, calendar-wise, it was close in time to my comments in the media about transgender issues that I left the American Psychiatric Association.
Dr. Thank you. Dr. Abloh, could you just re-articulate a little bit the time frame of the auditory hallucinations, visions, command hallucinations that you referenced? How long have those been going on for Edwin Alemany?
Really since adolescence.
Okay. Is it your opinion today, based on the records that you reviewed in your interview of him, that those auditory hallucinations continue to this day?
I believe that they do. Okay. Especially when he's not medicated, which he generally is when incarcerated.
Okay. As far as his school records, some of the earlier records that you reviewed, you described his first admission as psychiatric admission as being at approximately age 14.
Correct.
You cited some issues that were ongoing that he was experiencing in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, correct?
In middle school, and I alluded to...
This is when you were describing the beginning of the beginning history.
Right. So when he had an individual educational program, which would have been before middle school probably, that it began.
Okay. And that individualized program, is it your testimony that was a psychiatric issue?
Probably his learning challenges were, even back then, driven by psychiatric diagnoses, yes. Of course they were, because they said ADHD, but it was more than that.
Right. And a fifth grader, I should know the answer to this question, but you're the one testifying. A fifth, sixth, or seventh grader, what would those age brackets be, Dr. Abelo?
Well, I've got one. So a seventh grader is 13.
Okay. So if we backtrack it, a sixth grader would be 12, and a fifth grader 11, approximately.
Correct.
And you talked at about age 12 in a fair amount of detail sexual abuse that Mr. Alemany disclosed to you first in the December 2014 interview, and then he talked to you in even more detail in the March 2015 interview, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And relative to those two interviews, at that time, had you already completed your review of all the mental health records, the 5,000 or so pages that you described earlier?
No.
Okay. At what point did you finish your review of those records?
I've been reviewing them in an ongoing manner until this very day.
Okay. You did testify extensively on your review and how they impacted your opinion on certain records from the Westwood Lodge from 2002?
Yes.
And I want to show you this particular document, sir. Just show you the cover sheet first and ask you if you recognize what that document is.
That is a Westwood Lodge Hospital discharge summary.
And the date of the admission and date of the discharge, Dr. Abelo, if you'd be kind enough to tell the jury, was what?
So the date of admission is the 25th of March, 2002, and the date of discharge is April 5th, 2002.
And that would have put Mr. Alemany at approximately how old if he was born in 1984?
18.
So this would have been at about the time he was aging out of the system?
Correct.
So one of his last admissions to one of these facilities?
Correct.
Can I show you this page right here where it says on the same record, part of the same record, history of sexual and physical emotional abuse. Again, you've been doing this for a long time. You recognize what kind of entry this is on a record, correct?
Yeah, that's a note. They're asking the clinician to document if there was physical, emotional, or sexual abuse.
Okay, and where it says denies, the subject matter of these notes would have been Edwin Alemany.
Sure.
But it would be your test. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it unusual for someone to disclose something like that later in life?
No.
Okay. You referenced another Westwood admission, again in 2002. And I just asked you to take a look at this document right here, Dr. Abelo. Do you recognize this discharge summary?
Yes, that's a discharge summary from the Westwood Lodge Hospital, admission date May 31st, 2002, and discharge date June 13th, 2002.
And flipping forward just to the chart again, where it says history of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, the entry is what, sir?
Denied.
Denied. A second time, correct?
Correct.
And most recently, you referenced various records that you reviewed relative to different incarcerations in between 2002 and 2013. Do you remember those?
Yes.
And just showing you these progress notes, I'm sure you've seen these before. Do you recognize these?
I do. Those are Department of Correction progress notes. This one, headline psychiatry.
Okay. And these, again, as the other two, they're for Edwin Alemany.
Correct.
And again, in the note here, the entry, history of being sexually abused, or traumatization, as it's written, no history.
Correct.
Now, Dr. Abelo, you were able, or Mr. Alemany was able to give you a fair amount of detail, correct, on this history of sexual abuse?
I'd say a fair amount of detail.
Okay. And I just want to check. Can I have one moment, Your Honor? You had referenced that he started breaking down and weeping uncontrollably when he reported this to you.
Correct.
Dr. Abelow, would you agree with me that in all the materials that you reviewed, the first disclosure, the first reporting of any history of sexual abuse was to you in December 2014 and then again in March 2015?
It would seem so.
Okay. And you agree, just as the records indicate, at least the three that I just showed you, that he denied on at least 3 occasions any history of sexual abuse?
Correct.
Okay. He told you about multiple incidents involving oral sex and anal sex, correct?
Correct.
And then oral sex also being performed on him?
Correct.
The oral sex and the anal sex, did he relay to you or in some amount of detail that he was forced to do those acts on someone else?
Yes.
And
well, he didn't perform anal sex on someone else. It was performed on him.
Okay. Okay. So the oral, I understand. So he told you about multiple instances. Did he tell you where these incidents took place?
At a friend's house.
And he was how old when you interviewed him? Approximately 29?
Yes.
In December of 2014?
Right.
The friend's house that this occurred at, did he tell you in any detail who committed these acts on him?
Only that it was an adult male at a friend's house. That's all he was able to say. I did seek more information.
Okay. And he told you this with great emotion, correct?
Yes.
Now, on a couple of different instances in your direct examination, Dr. Abelow, you had mentioned that the defendant, Mr. Alemany, suffers from some form, or not some form, suffers from amnesia.
Correct.
Okay. And
as a symptom.
Yes, and you've generated reports relative to this case, and in fact have testified at a prior hearing in this case regarding your opinion on his amnesia, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you would agree with me that your opinion as to his amnesia is that as it relates to July 23rd and July 24th, he's not able to recall certain periods of that day, correct?
That's correct.
But you've also had the opportunity to review a police interview that was conducted on July 24th of 2013. Do you recall that? Where he was able to recall certain portions of the day.
Seemingly.
You would agree with that?
Seemingly.
Seemingly, okay. Okay. Let me ask you this. The seemingly part of it, you obviously want to qualify the answer.
I was thinking of doing so.
Okay. So let me ask you this. The portion of the interview that you listened to, would it be your testimony that he would have gotten that information from someone else and somehow relayed it?
Well, as I understand it, if the data that is in hand from authorities is correct, much of what he's saying is incorrect. It's not correct. What he's saying happened. Other information.
I would ask that that be stricken, Your Honor. So what I'm asking you, sir, is you've listened to the statement.
I did.
You would agree that listening to the statement that there are certain parts of the day that he can account for and certain parts of the day that he cannot account for? or won't account for.
I want to make sure I'm answering the question completely and accurately. And so he states some things that happened during parts of the day, and during other parts, he says what happened throughout the course of the days. So he gives a recital of what happened.
A timeline, if you will.
A timeline, and he's being at that time very much pressured by the interviewers that can't be right.
That be stricken, Your Honor. Pressured. You've reviewed the interview.
Yes, I have.
In what way did his... day, we can agree on the timeline language?
I think we both have the same idea of the timeline language, so let's say we agree.
Okay, fine. So what would, given you diagnosed him with amnesia, correct?
I diagnosed him with conditions that would lead to amnesia, to a condition that would lead to amnesia.
And are there parts of that statement that in your opinion, based on your review of his mental health history in your interviews of him, that you would say are not his own memory?
I believe that there are parts of the statement that he is grasping for straws to try to explain something he does not remember.
Well, let me ask you this. The fact that he describes in detail where he was on Monday night, July 22nd, 2013, would you view that as grasping at straws, his version of what he did that night?
No, as long as it's corroborated by others, which that is.
Okay. And as far as his version of going to meet a friend and a brother on the following day, July 23rd, and what they wound up doing, would you describe that as grasping at straws?
That they ended up, maybe you can tell me a little bit more, what they ended up doing.
They wound up drinking all afternoon, getting Chinese food at the Tahiti Lounge, drinking some more after that, lighting off fireworks. Would that be grasping at straws?
Again, no, corroborated by others, not grasping at straws.
Okay.
The lighting off fireworks, I don't remember that from the statement.
Good point.
Fine, Ron. The description in the statement that he gave, the part of the statement that he gave that dealt with him arguing with his girlfriend and leaving the apartment to go buy some cigarettes, would you view that as grasping at straws? The night of July 23rd, late on the night of July 23rd, 2013.
No, I don't consider that grasping at straws because that's corroborated as well.
And what parts of the day would you categorize, or what parts of the statement would you categorize as grasping at straws, Dr. Avalo?
Mr. Alemany doesn't recall the events, the crimes with which he's charged. He doesn't recall that time period. So I would say from arguing with his girlfriend about his extensive drinking and being thrown out until his arrest, essentially.
Well, you're aware that there were 3 crimes, correct?
Correct.
One committed at about 4:24 a.m., the second over a period of time probably from about 5:38 to somewhere right around a little bit before 8 a.m.
Correct.
And the last one just after midnight on July 24th, 2013. You'd agree with that?
12:05, correct.
And when you say didn't recall the time frame regarding when the crimes were committed, that wouldn't really apply to the July 24th, 2013 one, would it?
No, it would.
Well, let me ask you this. Didn't he give, accurate or not, didn't he give an account of how he had injured his hand right at around the time that crime would have occurred? Didn't he do that?
A seemingly inaccurate rendition, yes.
And again, my question, accurate or not, he did give an account.
He gave an account.
Okay. So what I'm trying to distinguish, Doctor, is giving an account, accurate or not, is different than saying, I just don't remember about that part of the day. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Somebody could make up something to try to explain not remember, and that would bridge the gap that I think you're referencing. So I think that that's what Mr. Alemany does.
In one of your answers earlier, Dr. Abelo, you had talked about the defendant's wandering. But, excuse me if I have to say, but it was very general and vague. Could you be more specific in what was your source of information for the wandering?
Sure.
First, your source of information for that. What are we talking about? Sources, times, dates, locations. What's your level of specificity with respect to that?
Okay, so as regards documents we have related to Mr. Alemany's middle school years from his educators, they document this wandering behavior.
At ages 11, 12, and 13?
Correct.
And is that documented?
More 12 and 13, but
12
yes.
and 13. Where, if anywhere, where else in the records that you reviewed did you see any documentation of the defendant wandering off?
In my, number one, in my interview with Estrella, who is Jose's significant other, she attested to his wandering behavior as well. So that is also relevant. And then in...
Estrella is Jose's mother, not significant.
I'm sorry. Jose's significant other, Mary, attested to this behavior on the part of Edwin. And of course, when I interviewed Edwin, he is flummoxed by that too. I mean, he notes that at times his family has said and been angry with him, as have girlfriends, saying, where were you? Why didn't you attend this event? Or whatever it might be. And he remains confused by it, which is why I went looking for it in the records and asking his family about it as well. And it's there in his educational history. It's there in medical records as well of hospitals where he will suddenly just be walking into the hallway from a group. You're supposed to be there sitting and conversing with other patients, and he'll just start walking away, and when they confront him, he says, I don't understand, what do you mean?
Part of the records that you reviewed, case-related materials, I think you said in your answer, included grand jury minutes. You may have referred to them as depositions.
They are grand jury minutes.
Criminal side, grand jury minutes, civil side, depositions.
Thank you.
And you had the opportunity, Dr. Abelo, to review the grand jury minutes in this particular case?
I did.
Let me show you this transcript, sir. Dr. Abelo, you've seen this before, correct?
Yes, I have.
And these two names right here, Leslie Sustache and Estrella Sustache, you recognize those names, correct?
Right.
And these are the grand jury minutes that you would have reviewed as part of your general case review and in preparation for your criminal responsibility evaluation.
Small portion, yes.
Yes, okay. And I just want to show you this page right here from Leslie Sustache's testimony. When she was being asked about... Just directing your attention to page 26 of Leslie Sustash's grand jury testimony. Do you recall reading that?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that this references, Leslie Sustash references a period of wandering off by the defendant, Edwin Alemany.
Yes.
And that had to do with the relationship going on between Elizabeth Stevenson, who you know who she is?
Yes.
And Elizabeth Stevenson is who, Doctor?
Well, actually, I'm forgetting now. Elizabeth Stevenson.
Would it refresh you if I told you it was his girlfriend
Yeah,
at the time?
yes, so, sorry.
So this particular portion of the grand jury testimony references Ms. Sustash saying that she'll be upset, meaning Elizabeth. He left.
Yes.
He left for 2 days, right?
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
She'll be upset. He'll try to call us, try to go back home, and she won't accept the calls. And then the next day she'll end up picking him up wherever he was at.
Right.
Okay. And she was further asked, was that a pattern? Was that something that just kept repeating itself? And Ms. Sustash said yes.
Right.
And she was further asked, was that over a long period of time?
Yes.
And the last question she was asked on this subject, as far as you could see your observations based on what you knew about your brother and based on your conversations with Elizabeth, what was the cause of that repeating pattern, and what was the answer?
The drinking.
Okay. And you understand that the drinking was a reference to Edwin Alemany.
Yes, indeed.
So are there two parallel, two trains going down parallel tracks, one related to the drinking, one related to mental health issues, or are they kind of just a mismatch, your testimony, and everything's going on at once?
Of course. It's the confluence of those issues. The alcohol is his way of trying to cope with his underlying mental disorders. It only makes matters worse, and when his sister says the cause was the drinking, it's a rather simplistic notion.
Okay, fine. You had gone through a fairly long list of medications on direct examination with Mr. Denner. Do you recall that?
I do.
And these medications were Thorazine, Depakote, Clonidine, lithium, Seroquel, Paxil, Wellbutrin, Ativan, Ambien, Visceral. Do you remember those?
I do.
Are you able to say with any particularity, specificity, what type of medications Edwin Alemany was on in the time frame leading up to July 23rd of 2013?
I don't believe Mr. Alemany was on medicines other than ones that he tried to procure from friends of the benzodiazepine variety, tranquilizer.
What's a benzodiazepine?
It was about,
correct?
What's
a
that?
Tranquilizer, a relaxant?
Correct.
Now, this list of medications, certainly it's not your testimony, Dr. Abelo, that he was taking all of these medications all at the same time.
No, generally it'd be like 5, 4, 6 of them.
And you'd agree with me, Dr. Abelo, that the medications that you testified to on direct examination, those were given at various times in between those admissions that we agreed on 1999 to 2002.
Correct. Other than when he's in prison.
Correct. Was your answer.
Well, I was adding to it.
I didn't ask you about when he was in prison.
Your Honor, may he be allowed to continue on the next question?
2004, the Geodon, you said that was the latest, a later version of Thorazine, correct? Did I understand that answer correctly?
Correct.
Okay, you said he was on Geodon in 2004. Where was that?
Approximately. Geodon.
Well, I'd like you to be as specific as you could with the medications, doctor.
Oh, absolutely, but you'll understand, I may have to pull out the records.
Take all the time you need.
You got it, no problem. That would be Westwood Lodge is the first time they tried Geodon.
That would have actually been in about 2002?
Correct.
Okay, so not 2004.
Well, they may have used it in 2004 as well, but I think it's 2002.
But you know from your testimony that he had aged out and couldn't have been at Westwood Lodge in 2004, correct?
Correct. He would have to have gotten it in jail, which is it would be unusual because they don't have brand name medicines generally.
Okay. Dr. Abelo, from 2004 to 2010, those Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center records I asked you about,
Yes.
we had previously agreed that there was no mental health treatment in that window of hospitalizations, correct?
Well, no. During that time when he's incarcerated, he's treated as a mental health patient. And there may be notations about that in those records. I'd have to literally have them right here.
Well, let me ask you this question. Is it your memory, this might answer the question, is it your memory that he may have been sent from a correctional facility to Beth Israel Deaconess?
Yes.
Okay. But if he was incarcerated, those types of hospitalizations or visits wouldn't include things like binge drinking or cocaine binge, correct?
I don't know what happens in prisons today, but I suppose anything can happen. But I think you're asking me, were the visits for medical reasons? And the visits were for medical reasons, but they may well have noted psychiatric symptoms being dealt with in the jail or medicines being given in the jails.
Okay.
Talking about the schedule and trying to readjust some time frames and some expectations. We're going to finish Dr. Abelo's testimony tomorrow. We're going to start at 9 o'clock. There are further witnesses to handle tomorrow. There might be a lag between when Dr. Abelo finishes and the next witness testifies. It's unavoidable, so I'll apologize in advance. That pushes the closing arguments and jury instructions to Friday. Just so you have an idea of why we can't start closing arguments and jury instructions in the afternoon, they have about an hour to argue a piece. So that's 2 hours. My instructions are 2 hours. All right? Yeah, they are. So if we started at 2, we're not finishing. All right? That's why it's best to start it at 9 o'clock and where you're nice and fresh. All right? So I'm telling you right now. So we're getting to the end of the case. We're not there. The case is going to end on Friday as far as you getting the case. So please continue to do what I asked you to do. Please do not look for information outside of court. Don't provide information to obtain information. Have a good rest of the day, please. Again, I thank you. Come at 9 o'clock. We'll continue with Dr. Abel at 9 o'clock.
All rise. Jurors, leave the notepads on your chairs and step down.
You can be seated. So, I have my jury instructions that you've looked at. What I know I need to do tonight is to consider, and probably I need to, I think defense would agree, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mr. Denner, on a consciousness of guilt instruction so the jury knows how to use that evidence. Because it'd be unfair not to give a consciousness of guilt instruction, which is a predominant feature of this case, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll add a consciousness of guilt instruction. I'm going to delete from my humane practice instruction the telephone call of 510, because that wasn't introduced.
Fine.
All right. Anything else I should be working on from the government's perspective? I have your instructions. Are you going to give me anything else? Because I want to compare my elements to your elements. I'm going to take out the stealing by confinement as a element of first-degree felony murder, because you're not moving on that, correct?
I thought we were.
Oh, you are? Actually, I didn't look. I thought you weren't. Okay, no. So it's stealing by confinement, armed robbery, and armed robbery masked.
Yes.
Okay, stealing by confinement in this circumstance is a life felony.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll keep it in. I have it. I'll keep it in. Anything else I should be looking at?
Yes, Your Honor. In our jury instructions, we are asking for the second prong of the very deep Padova instruction, based on a case that I cited in the jury instruction, which is Como versus Heard.
What's this? Do you have a copy of that or cite on it?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Which is the known taking of alcohol, knowing that would be a trigger? That's the second prong,
Yes, Your
correct?
Honor. 413, that's 834, and page 842.
842.
Yes, and the two places in the evidence I would suggest support is Elizabeth Stevenson's testimony.
Could we talk exactly
I'm sorry,
about it?
Will be Ms. Stevenson's testimony, where she discusses how when the defendant was not drinking, he was fine, he acted normal, but when he was drinking, he became very abusive, physically and emotionally towards her. And somewhat corroborated by the defendant's statement, in which he suggests that he doesn't drink like he used to, because when he used to drink, he would get very argumentative. So I think based on those pieces of evidence, plus what the jury's hearing now, with significant mental hospitalizations, the jury could infer that the defendant should know that if he starts to drink, he can act in an physically abusive manner.
Okay, so I'll look at her to see whether or not the second prong of Padova is called for.
And we have a copy of Ms. Stevenson's cross-examination. I have a copy for the court and a copy for Mr. Denner.
All right, and I'll read that case tonight.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Was there anything else you were looking for?
Just one thing I'd like to inquire of the court. We saw the original instruction, the identification instruction, Your Honor, and Mr. Hellman submitted a proposed instruction as
Right.
well. And I think in the context of this particular case, I would ask you to give it consideration, especially as it relates to the Amy Lord matter. There is no identification witness. All the identification evidence comes in through other sources, Your Honor.
No, you're saying I have to give the Gomes instruction?
I'm not saying, I'm just asking you to consider what Mr. Hellman proposed as an instruction.
How is it different from Gomes? I did the modified Gomes.
Yes, it is essentially a modified version of the Gomes instruction.
Right.
It takes out some of the language to make it, I would suggest, more fair to both sides, such as...
Well, I took out the language that it's the most important issue, because it's not. And that would be disingenuous, wrong, and actually harmful to give that instruction. So
Right.
I modified Gomes, I think, to suit this case. But I'll look at your language, Mr.
Thank you.
Hellman.
That's all we're asking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was there anything else?
Not from the common
Did you
law.
see my merger instruction? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Sure. Did you see my merger instruction on felony murder?
I
Okay.
haven't yet. I'll read it.
Okay,
as
you'll
soon as
read
we
it.
get
You
on
see
stage,
it?
Your Honor.
Okay, read it tonight. What I did was, because of course, many of the crimes, the first-degree murder, felony murder, and the second-degree murder have assaultive behavior as elements. And what merger tells the jury is that they can't consider the acts that constitute the fatal blows to be predicates for a felony. So you obviously can't charge ABDW as a felony when someone gets someone over the head with a big, you know that. So what the SJC has suggested is that the court identify the fatal blows and exclude that from the felonies. So what I did in my proposed instructions was to put that out on the table and say that the fatal blows are the knife wounds and strangulation. That can't be part of the armed robbery. Just to take that out of it.
Fair enough, Your Honor.
Does that? Look at it, see if it makes sense. And I assume, Mr. Denner, did you look at that merger language? Or take a look at it tonight.
I will, Your Honor.
All right, because I think that's an issue that in wide range of felonies, I think it behooves the court to tell them what they can't consider.
I think that makes sense.
Right, and you know, and oftentimes in a felony murder situation, there's more than one victim. Someone comes in, guns blazing, and there's an assault on someone else. So you can say the assault on someone else predicates felony murder as opposed to assault on the victim. Here we have one victim, so there's a temporal aspect to it. So we need to have the violent act that leads to death be separate and distinct from the felonies. So that's what I'm trying to do with this language. So take a look at it and see if you both agree. All right.
Will do, Your Honor.
Was there anything, Mr. Dent, I should be looking for? Looking at?
Of course, I disagree very strongly
With that second prong?
The second prong.
Sure.
And with regard to extreme atrocity, I think you should go a little bit further and set out that it's a Commonwealth burden, essentially to, I don't know how exactly I would word it, but the way it is, and I think what you're saying is in accord with the cases I've read, but when I read the cases I didn't like it either, that essentially they may consider impairment in the context of that, and then extreme atrocity, and then it talks about alcohol and mental illness.
I gave the instruction as written in the model jury instructions on mental illness and atrocity and cruelty. There is a case, which name escapes me, that I have on my desk, where Justice Gantz suggested that it go further than that.
And I read that case too, and I would agree with that, and I'm going to ask the court to do that.
I'll take a look at the Gantz concurrence and see whether or not that's appropriate in this case.
Because my sense is that really almost undoes the viability of the insanity defense, because coming in through a back door, I think the burden is actually being shifted over to us.
Well, the way the instruction says now is that the jury can consider, as I say, probably 12 times, the jury can consider mental impairment as it relates to the government's proof of atrocity and cruelty.
I understand, but I think the important part of it for me is it's still up to the government to prove the absence of impairment, Your Honor, because it is their burden, just as they have to prove the absence of, they have to prove sanity, the absence of insanity.
The way the instruction reads now is you may consider the defendant's mental condition at the time of the killing, including any credible evidence of mental impairment or the effect on the defendant of his consumption of alcohol or drugs, and determine whether Collins has proved beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant committed the killing with extreme atrocity or cruelty.
And I consider that defective.
Okay.
I understand that's the current state of it.
That's the current state of the law. I'll look at Justice Gantz's decision to see whether or not that's warranted in this case. You had mentioned in your opening statement, Mr. Denner, manslaughter. What's the theory of manslaughter that you seek?
I think it would be more a theory of second-degree murder than
Right.
manslaughter, so I think that on reflection I wouldn't be looking for manslaughter.
Right. You would not be, because I don't think there's any theory of manslaughter supported by the facts. So I think it would be error to give manslaughter.
Theoretically I could be, but I just don't see it in this case now the more I think about it.
Right. So right. So what you're saying is that the diminished capacity or a mental state could have an impact on the intent from one of the first-degree felonies for the atrocity, cruelty, or for the premeditation to make it a second degree.
Yes, sir.
Which I'll give that instruction. All right, but manslaughter is not warranted, and under any theory. I think that does it. I'll take a look at that stuff tonight, and I'll read her.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
Not from the Commonwealth.
Anything else, Mr. Denner?
No, sir.
All right, thank you.
Or, this stands adjourned for the day.
I'll look at it tonight.